At some point in your life, you run into a decision that actually matters. Not obvious, not routine, but where the decision actually has real consequences. A decision that can put you on a path that is expensive or hard to reverse. What makes those decisions difficult just isn't the stakes, but rather the fact that most people don't have a reliable way to approach the decision. They think about it, they step away, but they never really make true progress. And the longer it sits there, the harder it is to resolve. It drains your focus, your energy, and your confidence. In this video, I'm going to give you a simple, structured way to attack a hard decision so you can move forward without spinning on it. I'm Carr Ferrell. Welcome back to my channel. When facing a difficult decision, the most important thing is to understand exactly and specifically what it is you're trying to decide. We see this all the time as lawyers when our clients come in looking for help with their problems. The biggest first step, and often the most difficult part, is just understanding what the problem is. It's interesting that in law school, the one skill that every law school teaches, that every law student is required to learn and to master, and that every law exam tests, is that skill of identifying issues. The iconic law school exam consists of a sequence of paragraphs, maybe 2 or 3 pages, describing a complex problem with a garbled set of facts, and requiring the law student to go through, sort through the facts, and figure out what are the true issues, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for. So it is with making a good decision. Unless you understand specifically what it is you're trying to decide, it's going to be hard to get to a decision that'll either be useful or satisfying. The second step in making a hard decision is determining whether this is a decision that needs to be made now, or can the decision wait? Can it be put off? For example, there are some decisions that just can't wait. For example, you may have a management recruit that becomes available, an employee that becomes available to your company that you would like to hire, but she's expensive and she would disrupt your salary compensation scheme. On the other hand, she would be just perfect for your company, but you also know that she has other offers and you have to decide now. There are some decisions, however, where you can take a little bit more time. And the more time that you can take, the more facts that you can gather, the more due diligence that you can do, and often the better the decision. And it's often useful to understand that some deadlines are artificial. Lawyers love to create contrived deadlines because they know that time kills deals. We often see that acquisition offers are made on a Friday afternoon, with the lawyers requiring that the letter of understanding be signed by Sunday evening so that an announcement can be made to the press on Monday morning. We also see this with settlement offers, where the lawyers try to push through shortened time frames before too much inertia works its way into the discussions. When you're facing hard decisions that just feel like they need to be made now, stop and ask yourself, are you just being given the bum's rush by lawyers or by another party where the time frame, the shortened time frame, is just artificial or contrived? Push back on this if you can, because generally you'll make a better decision if you can gather more information and have a little more time to think through the decision. A related inquiry to this question of whether we need to decide now is the consideration of whether or not our decision is reversible or irreversible. Obviously, if the decision can be reversed without a lot of extra cost or consequence, then the decision can be made more quickly and reversed later if necessary. And if the decision is irreversible, clearly you'll want to take a little bit more time and gather as much information as possible before committing. Next, when making a hard decision, consider whether it's possible to break the one big decision down into several smaller ones. Treat this like an engineering problem. Can we take a complex engineering problem and break it down into a sequence of smaller problems that are more tractable, easier to solve? One of my favorite sayings is, life by the inch is a cinch. And when it comes to big decisions, this is a great piece of advice to follow. For example, you're trying to decide about launching a new product. It's a big risk because the resource commitment for your company is going to be huge. While you don't need to make the full decision all at once, you can test the decision, you can do focus group studies, you can get feedback, and then little by little determine whether the product is worth launching, whether there's demand, and whether the ultimate decision to launch this product really makes sense. The complexity of making a really big decision can often be greatly simplified by looking at the decision as a sequence of smaller decisions that need to be made. The next step when making a big decision is to separate the facts, the things that you know, from those assumptions that you're making about the decision. Most bad decisions seem to be made because our assumptions are incorrect. We hope our assumptions will turn out a certain way, but when they don't, they can unexpectedly frustrate the result of our decision. It's often helpful to make a list of facts and assumptions. Create 3 buckets. One bucket contains all the facts that you know to be true. A second bucket contains assumptions that you're making that you believe to be true or you expect to be true. And then the third bucket will contain those assumptions that you're not quite sure about, that you need to gather more information about before you can use those assumptions when making your decision. For example, you might be considering a partnership, and so far, conversations have gone pretty well. Everybody seems fairly aligned. But as you're deciding whether to execute on the partnership, it's helpful to think about what you really know versus the assumptions that you're making with respect to the partnership. For example, there are certain facts that you will know about the players in the partnership. You'll know what's been said, you'll know what's been discussed. But clearly you'll be making a lot of assumptions, and bad decisions come from the assumptions that don't work out as you previously assumed. For example, rather than relying on what's been said in conversations leading up to this partnership, think about past behavior as a possible guidepost for how the relationship might go. For example, do they meet deadlines? Do they live up to commitments? And how do they respond under pressure? People reveal reliability through behavior and not intentions. When considering this partnership, think about the additional information you'd like to have, that you would like to test before finalizing your decision. The next step is to think about ways of limiting your downside in the event that your decision does not meet expectations. For example, with the partnership, maybe there's milestones that can be tested or progress payments to be made, or exit ramps built into the relationship so that as the partnership progresses, either party can exit if expectations of either party are not being met. For example, is there a way to structure this decision so that in the event of failure, everything else doesn't get taken along with it? As we get to the final decision, there are 3 points I'd like to make with respect to deciding. The first point is something that was taught to me by my contracts professor when I was in law school. His advice was that when in doubt, don't. If the contract doesn't feel right, don't enter into it. Trust your gut, follow your intuition. When in doubt, don't. And I think that's really good advice. If there's some voice in your head that's giving you caution, that's saying this isn't a good deal for you, you should listen to that voice. I've placed a link to that video in the description section below. A second point I'd like to share with you with respect to making decisions is that sometimes the decision just isn't ready to be made. We famously see this with the Supreme Court. Oftentimes the Supreme Court will receive a case and the case will be rejected because the court will say the case just isn't ripe. It's not ready to be heard. The facts haven't fully developed in a way that allows us to make a final decision. So at least for now, we're going to reject the opportunity to make a legal decision on these facts. And in many cases, when the Supreme Court rejects a case for lack of ripeness, those cases never return to be heard by the court again. Not only does this protect the Supreme Court from making bad decisions on immature facts, but it also greatly reduces the workload on the court. And the third point I'd like to make is that sometimes you just need to make a decision. And once you make that decision, you should make it with confidence. You should move forward and not revisit whether that decision should have been made in the first place. Okay, that's really all I have to say today about making hard decisions. If you got something out of this video, I'd really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. That will help remind YouTube to share it with others. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next video.